Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting edition of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Vaughn Smith, and this is Cisco CCNA for exam 200-301. And we are going to be talking about wireless LAN controllers and access points as part of our networking components section. And Mr. Ronnie is going to tell us all about it. Here he is. How's it going?
It's going well, Vaughn. Once again, thank you for joining me as I've now kind of dragged out the idea of networking components to a third little episode here, right, in terms of our little section that Vaughn was mentioning. We want to, of course, dive into the realm of wireless just a little bit. We're going to talk about more about some of the details in wireless later on, but at least at the beginning, I want to talk about the basics and the components here. I want to introduce you, in case you haven't, right, to the concept of wireless LAN controller. And of course, we want to discuss the idea of the access points that we have also. Okay, so Vaughn, we're going to be talking about those two, and we're also going to talk about the idea of the topology that these things can be arranged in as we need them, because that's what's actually starting to happen. Is Vaughn, in terms of wireless, this is becoming the faster and the fastest type of growing technology that we tend to have in our LANs to help expand the way that they actually happen. So, Vaughn, that's what we're going to be focusing in on. Okay?
Sounds good. Yeah, I can't remember the last time I had to hardwire anything, honestly.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? That when you hear, like, why would I ever connect a cable back in? Because everything just seems to work. Well, Vaughn, there comes a point in time, especially in the realm of, networks, that we don't tend to wire in anymore because wireless has become such a natural part of our LANs, an extension of our LANs that we don't even think about, right? It provides at least people that are going to be added in temporarily. So we might have a wireless guest network, right? So that they don't have to actually find a station. They can just hook into the wireless and get a connection out. And we tend to separate those so they don't get access, of course, to our regular business network. So it's an easy way to provide connection when they need it, especially to vendors and different partners, without them having to get access inside of our network as well. But the other thing is, just like everybody else actually starts to do, and we did this right here, Vaughn, in IT Pro TV. As we moved to this new building, we said, oh, this is how many network jacks that we need, in this space, okay? And of course, after we went ahead and started adding people in, Vaughn, we kind of almost miscounted in that sense, because as soon as we started adding in devices, we realized not that we were severely, under the account that we wanted, but it was enough to where we realized some devices are just going to be needing to connect in wirelessly. Okay, is what we also have. So Vaughn, that's what we want to talk about here is a couple of different things. Okay, wireless itself has many different standards to the idea of wireless, and they of course have evolved over the period of time. But since we're talking about the components themselves, this is where most of us are familiar with the idea of the home type of network, and that's what we want to actually take a look at as well in terms of some of the topologies as we get to them. So let's go ahead and take a look at my screen, and that will help us out. All right, so Vaughn, here it is. We're using the same diagram that we have ready to go, and we're really focusing in on right here, okay, the idea of the WLAN, or I usually write it like I do down here at the bottom of the screen, the WLCs, which stands for wireless LAN controller. Now, the idea of both these, they can work together, but wireless access points themselves don't always have to be just the idea here of a wireless access point. Vaughn, maybe at home, you might have also set up your own internet connection, and you might have, let's say, like a single PC that's hooked up, and you might have a cable running to it that goes into what you consider your wireless device, right? Your wireless router. And that device actually does have the ability for you to hook into the back with a physical cable, as well as, of course, use the antenna to actually have wireless. So Vaughn, by itself, that device can function without anything at all, okay? And that's what we also have the ability to do. So sometimes, Vaughn, in a big network, though, these things can work, but by themselves, they're not as secure as you may want them to be, nor do they actually kind of fit into a management program of some sort. And what I mean by that, Vaughn, is that the more access points that are out there, if we use things like the wireless routers like what we buy at home, they can be configured to work, okay? They can actually do what they need to. But at the same time, Vaughn, it is the same problem that we have in terms of the device management. If something changes, such as the idea of updating firmware for these devices, because that's very important that we do so, means, Vaughn, if I add in, let's say, 25 of these wireless access points across my entire network, that means I have to go to every single one and update every single one of those one at a time. So that now starts to get a little bit more challenging in terms of the idea of access points. So a wireless router, even though it can serve its purpose in a fairly small network, it may not be the way to go because sometimes those devices are just kind of limited in terms of the range that they have, as far, I shouldn't say range, capacity in terms of the number of connections that they have that you can actually get connected to. But Vaughn, we add in the idea of what we call a wireless LAN controller. Well, now we can actually do this. We can add in 50 or 100 different access points. And when we start doing that, we can actually configure the management on one device, and then those configurations can be pushed out to those access points as well. Now, in the past, Vaughn, these types of access points, they were called lightweight access points, okay? And that meant you didn't go into those devices to really configure anything. You could, but normally what it actually allowed them to do was really just communicate with a wireless LAN controller. And when they did that, then they could actually do, to do the configuration at one point and then push it out to all 100 or all 150 of them, and they can be consistent. The other thing that we can also do is we can set up authentication through the wireless LAN controller as well. We can set up a radius server on our network somewhere, and then once we do so, we can also go to the wireless LAN controller and say, hey, anybody that connects in through the wireless access point, it has to provide authentication or authorization and accounting to do so. So we can actually do all that through that wireless LAN controller, and it doesn't matter which access point that they go through, and it will actually be handled through that device as well. So Vaughn, let's take a look at this particular configuration here for a point as well. Okay. Now, when we start to do this, let me show you just a couple of different things. Okay. So Vaughn, as far as the device itself, here's a diagram that I actually pulled up. This one's a little bit older. The series, I think, is up to like the 9800s or so. So this is an 8500, a little bit older, but essentially it looks just about the same here, okay, is what we see. And here on the back, you can see that there's a port for management. There's also something called a service port, high availability port if you're actually kind of load balancing and you're doing more of that, or you're actually saying we want to do this for failover. And then you have a 10 gigabit Ethernet connection to be able to do this as well, okay? And these can be assigned for management, interfaces, you name it, they can do all that. Notice a dual type of power supplies here to ensure that your wireless device is always going to be up and going, okay? So Vaughn, once we start to connect these into the infrastructure of all the different wireless access points, then we can end up doing something like this, okay? So Vaughn, here in my diagram, you can kind of see this idea right here. So the wireless access point, it communicates with the different access points here, okay, using what we call CAPWAN, which essentially is the protocol to manage the wireless access points is what we have. And so Vaughn, what this allows me to do is if I'm on a laptop, I can actually walk through my network, and if I'm connected to wireless access point A or 1 at some point, and I continue to walk and move through, and at some point the signal is going to drop off of A and then connect to access point 2 over here, okay? Well, this allows me to try and maintain that connection because they're both using the same protocol. And they can say, hey, the wireless access point says this was connected A, and now needs to connect to access point 2. It can continue on and should be continuous without some type of drop off at any point in time.
I was going to say, the user would never even notice this.
Shouldn't, but sometimes it happens. Yeah.
Keyword shouldn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, again, all that's dependent upon all the equipment, right? So there's a little bit more involved, but technically, yes, they shouldn't actually notice it. If they do notice it, it's usually a blip, okay? If they notice it and then it picks right back up. Sometimes they're not exactly all together that way. So, for example, Vaughn, the system that we use right here, it's a great system. We use a Ubiquiti product along with the Ubiquiti controller that they have. But when we move from one access point to another, if you've actually been on wireless to try to do that, you try and watch a streaming video, you'll see it will stutter, or sometimes it'll even stop and just kind of spin, and then you have to kind of click because then it's switching access points to do so. But even though we've turned on the feature that says it should be seamless throughout, it doesn't always work. But on the Cisco stuff, if you're using Cisco wireless access points, which you should, along with their wireless access controller, you shouldn't have that much of a problem.
Yeah, and I know I've been in places where in the building, if you were in certain areas, because you were further away from that access point, and it sounded like for now learning about all these things, like they didn't have like a second one set up. Like there was only one. So if I was in this corner of the office, I wasn't getting nearly the same connectivity power, if you want to say, as if I was on the other side of the building. So they didn't really kind of set up multiple access points.
Right.
This is a while ago too. So
Yeah, so well now we have them all over the place. It's actually incredible how many access points we do have up in our building even now. So let's say it's anywhere between 6 to 10 different access points that we have. So we should have fairly good coverage.
yeah, and it wasn't in this company, so it was somewhere else many years ago.
Right. So those are some of the different things that we can do. Now, this actually expands out more, Vaughn. Okay. So let's talk about the way that this can also end up working. I think I hear a little bit of thunder going on in the background as well.
Yeah, that's not your stomach or my stomach if you hear anything.
I hope. So sometimes we also can do this across the entire IP subnet. So Vaughn, it doesn't matter how wide the range is, right? Between access point A or I keep saying A, access point 1 and access point 2, I can put wireless LAN controllers that are actually within the same subnet and even have this configuration right here, Vaughn. And this particular type of configuration for us is what they call an N+1 scenario, okay, is what this is called here, okay? Now, this, Vaughn, when we start doing this, it's the idea here that if the wireless access controller, if the one fails, right, and I only had one, well, then those access points aren't going to function at all. But if I can actually connect in and still use the cap WAN in between these two, even though they're actually not directly connected here, well, this will now allow me as well to still do the same thing, because that means the devices that are actually connected to one access point now will also fail over and connect to the other one. So that way we would still have that connectivity that we need through there. And we now have the idea of failover beginning to help us out. Okay. So this is another configuration that we can do, but notice it's actually within a single subnet. So this type of configuration is actually a fairly popular configuration if you're doing this. Now, as we start taking a look at other configurations, Vaughn, now we can see that here I have two different subnets instead. So on the left-hand side, I have 192.168.9.0 over on the right-hand side, the .10 network. And notice that the two different wireless LAN controllers that we have in between them, well, this one actually kind of lets me do it between the two different subnets as well. So this actually allows us to be able to have each other as their backup. Instead of actually setting one as a backup and then the other one's active, this one actually says, hey, with wireless LAN controller, whichever one fails, the other one will actually end up backing up as well. So it can even use something like this to help us out too, okay? So Vaughn, this is another type of configuration that we can also end up seeing, okay? And you might also hear it in this way. You might hear the term secondary and primary LAN controllers. And this one, notice it has three different access LAN controllers here, okay? So this one is what they call an N+N+1 type of topology here. So we set up two of them as being the primary LAN controller, and the third one, we don't. We set that one as being the backup. So any one of these actually goes off. This now becomes the primary one, and then it can actually take over for that one here. And so that's another way that this can be set up. So notice it can get a bit complex when we start talking about wireless LAN controllers.
And would you, for example, what you have right here,
Sure.
This would be for more power, or is this more for
This is more just for the idea of backup.
Backup. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering. Like, what's the main reason? It's not that this is going to make your signals any stronger or anything. It's just, if anything, it's failover. Is that what we call it?
Failover. Yep. Okay. So this allows us to be able to do that. And the reason why is, remember what you just said, right? When was the last time you actually plugged in anything? Okay. So you can imagine, Vaughn, if you're in the middle of trying to do something and you're only on wireless, well, now, if that wireless LAN controller that you are connected to through that access point, if it goes down, you don't really have to worry about it, because the secondary then becomes that LAN controller for you, so that you can pick up and you don't have to worry about it. But if this one didn't have any type of secondary there or any type of backup to fail over, well, then you're just out of luck on your wireless connection.
And if your like day-to-day business operations depends on wireless connections, that's why you would want to have so much backup power, because if a couple go down and we're all wireless, then how are we going to be able to function in the world?
Yeah, so it's kind of neat, Vaughn. I'm glad that you mentioned this, because the idea here, right, is if your business is dependent upon wireless, which not every single business is absolutely dependent upon wireless, but more and more people are connecting in using wireless networks too. But the key also is the consistency of the configuration. So Vaughn, these wireless access controllers, even though we can manage them one-on-one by going into every individual wireless LAN controller and doing what we need to do, the advantage here is when we connect this thing up to something like the Cisco DNA Center, and when we do that, we can now manage wireless LAN controllers through that single portal and management, And that way we can tell when these devices actually fail, and we might even be able to ensure and connect and do what we need to do to get them corrected back online. Even though, Vaughn, I may not be in the office at that point in time, if I can get access to the management portal from the web, might be able to get in there and actually do that. So I don't have to directly even go to that office unless there's something physically wrong in the network.
Yeah, back to that consistency and make it one point to where you can efficiently manage things.
Right.
I do have one other question. Those diagrams that you had with like the different ways that you can set up your wireless access points and everything. Is that something you would need to know for the exam? Are they going to go that far into like what we just saw?
Yeah, no, more than likely, right? The very fact is, what I wanted you to get out of this, right, is to realize that you can set up a single wireless LAN controller, okay? And most people might think that this is the greatest idea in the world until you realize you've created that single point of failure. But what I wanted to show you in reality, right, when you set up wireless LAN controllers, you're normally doing it because there's so many more access points for you to manage. But if you're going to do that, that means all those access points are dependent upon one system, which can still be your point of failure. So you want to always set this up probably in at least the N plus N, right? The N plus 1 type of configuration. But I wanted to show you in real life, you might see more than this. You might not understand why it's actually doing this. So more than likely on the exam, they're probably not going to get this far into it, but you do need to understand that. So Vaughn, I have one more thing to show at the end of our episode here as we're winding down on time. Let me see if I can actually bring up the right. Did I close out of everything? Let me see. Okay, there we go. So let me go ahead and take a look at this. Okay. So Vaughn, here is essentially what the wireless LAN controller looks like. It's no big, The reason why is because I don't have any access points in this. So this one is another one that can actually be there. But notice you have different network access points where you can connect in and see the access points as well as clients. But Vaughn, if I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do, it's right down here at the bottom where there are best practices. Then I can see, for example, how did I set this thing up? And I can see, Vaughn, I'm kind of scoring just a little bit above the median here, right? Above the actual midline. So this is 29 out of 52. So Vaughn, you can see these checkups that actually say, hey, we can disable these things, we can do that. But I want to take a look at the idea of the high controller availability and add in another one. Redundancy mode is not set. How do I want to do this? Then I can go in and actually set up the manual configuration from the wireless LAN controller right here. So this is all stuff that we can do. And let me scroll down a little bit more so that we can see maybe a couple of other things that we want to be able to do here. So notice security is another one. So notice there's 802.1x. There's access control lists that we have available to us. Transmission of power. Oh, Apple devices, Yvonne, that we have. And even some of the different other devices here. All these are systems that we may want to take a look at. Notice once again here, none of the active wireless LANs are compliant with the Cisco Apple best practices. That way you can even take a look and learn a little bit more. So even if you don't know how to set up everything, it can walk you through and help guide you through the interfaces that we have.
And you're logged into your wireless access.
My wireless LAN controller.
Yes. Okay. So this is not data center.
Nope.
Or DNA.
This is not the DNA. The Cisco DNA center.
We're logged into a different area than where we were in the previous episode.
So this is us actually logging into the device itself is what we're actually seeing here. Okay. Now this one you may be able to gain access to. You may not. So the only way for you to figure this out is you can create a free account at cisco.com. And what you're looking for, I would do a search for dcloud, DCLOUD, and click on that first link and see if it gives you access to this. So sometimes your account will give you access to one of these labs. Sometimes they will not. And once you get access in there, the only thing I typed in was wireless LAN controller, and it brought me up to this device that allowed me to be able to see. But there's nothing really connected here, but it will give you a chance to at least explore the interface a little bit more. But just understand that the overall purpose, right, a LAN controller really is to control those access points, to be able to configure them consistently if we need to, and of course, to actually provide that ability to do everything that we want wirelessly. Configure the 802.11 standard, whether we're doing A, G, B, AC, whatever else that you want to actually throw out there. The newest standard, of course, is the AX one that's actually out there. So some of the newer devices, of course, will have that. So you name it, there's actually so many different ones that are out there, but at least understand that basic idea. Bigger networks will have wireless LAN controllers. Smaller networks, probably not so much so. But just understand the basic components here. Don't worry about the one I just showed you, I just want you, if you're actually going into a real life situation and actually supporting something like this, those are some of the configuration that you want to see. I doubt that they'll get that detailed in terms of the exam. So Vaughn, that's probably a good rundown, at least, of the overview of wireless LAN controllers and access points.
All right. Well, great information as always. I always learn something when I host your shows, Ronnie. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. But we're going to go ahead and sign off for IT Pro TV. I've been your host, Vaughn Smith.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
We will see you soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.